So, you know what upsets me? Everyone complains that we will never see another Zidane. But we literally had a perfect one-to-one clone of the guy, a copy so immaculate that Zidane himself personally crowned him as his successor, and we let some creep, whose name is literally in those documents which I cannot name, bully him into giving up on football. Ribery was so jealous of Gourcuff, he literally made up rumors that he was gay and then got his buddies to shout homophobic slurs at him every time he got into the team bus. I can't stress this enough. Some of their teammates have claimed that Ribery, Gallas, Evrain and Nelka would literally slap him in the back of the head every time he walked by. Just schoolyard bully behavior. And that's not even the half of it, but I'm gonna get there eventually. First, let's just say that I can see why Ribery was so insecure about him. Look, in 2008, his friends went into the Euros desperately trying to convince themselves they'd be okay without Zidane. Ribery was the one they put all of their hopes on. You see, he was literally one of the first to be dubbed the new Zidane, but unfortunately for him, he did not live up to that name. France literally did not win a single match, and before he could regain their trust, Gourcuff showed up as their knight in shining armor and made everyone's claims to the title of the new Zidane look like a joke. Listen, I know some of you will say that not even Gourcuff was anywhere near Zidane's level, and I'd get that if we were talking about Ben Arfa or Samir Nasri, but anyone who actually saw Gourcuff in 2009 knows he was the real deal. The resemblance was just freaky. So, here's the thing, everyone in the country had already been familiar with Gourcuff for years at that point. Not only was his father an ex-footballer turned manager, but he was good enough himself that despite being one of the top tennis prospects in the country, even being invited to join the French National Tennis Center at Poitiers, after facing off against the young Rafael Nadal, he legitimately just gave up on tennis in favor of football. I mean, I can't blame him, especially given that 2 years later he had completely taken over the biggest academy tournament in France, the Coupe Gambardella, opening the scoring in the final to hand their first title in 30 years, already then getting scouted by Arsene Wenger, but still rejecting offers from Arsenal, Valencia and Ajax to stay with Rennes, being handed his professional debut at 17 years old, even though what would truly make Gourcuff a household name would be the under-19 Euros the following year, where he would lead France to the title, attracting interest from AC Milan, would come in and sign him a year later. By then, people were already so convinced of his talents that Berlusconi himself presented him to the fans by saying that, yes, I dare call our boy the new Zidane. However, the timing of this transfer was horrible. Behind the scenes, not only had Gourcuff been terribly shaken by the death of one of his friends in a car crash, but shortly after his arrival in Milan, his girlfriend tried to take her own life. As you may imagine, the toll this took on his mental state, added to his shy personality, was already more than enough to ruin any chance he had of thriving in a locker room stacked with superstars. Yet, it only became worse when Seedorf invited him to dinner, only so that Oscar Damiani, the agent who represented most of the club's inner circle, could ambush him, trying to pressure him to sign with him as well. A request that he maybe should have not rejected, since soon after, in the morning of the Champions League final, that same agent would call his father to have a conversation regarding his son's chances of playing that day. And well, let's just say that conversation didn't go well, and so, despite Gourcuff having been given actual game time in every round from the last 16 to the semis, he ended up watching the final from the stands, while to the shock of everyone there, Serginho, who had only made 6 appearances all season across all competitions, suddenly got to sit on the bench. Yeah, after that, he should have known it was game over. With Milan suddenly going back on their promise of selling Kaká to Man City for a record £100 million, Gourcuff's game time got cut so thin that he watched Benzema and Nasri, who were yet to take the jump out of Ligue A, get called up to the Euros while he was left behind. So, once Ancelotti made sure to call him a strange boy in his autobiography, while bringing in none other than Ronaldinho as extra competition for his spot, all while Gattuso injured him in his last training session, Gourcuff had enough. He demanded to be loaned out, and as fate would have it, it ended up at Bordeaux, precisely the team that had introduced Zinedine Zidane to the world. I guess if anyone at AC Milan had had the smallest sense of foreshadowing, they would not have included a €15 million buyout clause on that loan. Regardless, now it was too late. If the fact Bordeaux had only won the league once in the past 22 years didn't do it, then the fact Lyon had just taken their 7th title in a row was surely enough to kill anyone's hopes of some assault on the league title, with or without the next Zidane. So, when, on his debut in the French Super Cup, they defeated Lyon to take that trophy, everyone assumed it had to be just a coincidence, right? Well, on his league debut, with Bordeaux a goal behind, Gourcuff blasted a shot straight into the top corner, then put in a free kick for the winner, and if you thought that free kick routine wasn't planned, a couple weeks later he did it again. Already in August, he was getting his national team debut, and by September, he was getting his first start, not only immediately getting his first assist, but then going past his marker and blasting a shot at the bar, giving every Frenchman flashbacks from Zidane's own debut. Still, a month later, against Toulouse, already on a run of 5 goal contributions in 4 games, he scored a goal that was just, well, squint your eyes and you literally could not tell him apart from Zidane. As one newspaper wrote, his Cruyff turn was so smooth, it made the Dutch master himself look like a double-decker bus. But that was nothing, because days later he went back to play with friends, and if the previous match had given him flashbacks, now the fans were sure they were witnessing Zidane reborn. 2-0 down to Romania. First, he assisted Ribery, and then, from even further out than Zidane had done 14 years earlier, he secured a 2-goal draw. After that goal, something shifted in France. 15 matches in, with Lyon, as usual, on top of the table, 5 points ahead of second-place Nice, there should have been no doubts. However, when L'Équipe ran a poll, 40% of the fans believed Lyon would not win the title that year. But their fear wasn't Nice, it was Bordeaux. They were in 6th place, going on 22 years without the trophy, but somehow everyone seemed convinced they'd end up winning it. That's how confident the public was that they had just seen a real phenomenon in action, and they were right. Only 5 games later, Gourcuff had stepped onto a match against PSG and handed them a 4-0 defeat, their worst in 80 years, to put Bordeaux already within a single point of Lyon. But that is not what anyone was talking about that day. The only thing they could talk about was the goal he had scored himself. After that one, you can't forget any restraint or composure. The next day, the cover of L'Équipe had 2 faces on it, Gourcuff and Zidane. The headline, just 2 words, the successor. Meanwhile, on TV, you had Christophe Dugarry, World Cup winner and Zinedine Zidane's best friend, claiming that I felt ill when Zidane retired. Watching Gourcuff has cured me. Yeah. The next game, he scored again. The game after that, another one. By the 3rd game, they beat PSG a 2nd time, now 3-0 to reach the final of the Coupe de France. And though then, a stretch of poor form saw them take only 1 win in 6 games to fall back down to 5th place, 6 points off the top. Once they realized they'd need a virtually perfect record in order to clutch the title, Gourcuff lost his head. First came an assist against Nice, then an incredible goal against Le Havre, and in the final of the French Cup, to get the party started, he first pulled off his trademark free kick routine from 40 yards out, and then scored one himself to take the title. Though he wasn't done. With Bordeaux still 2 points off the top, the next game, as they were about to settle for a draw, Gourcuff first banged in a free kick, and when Rennes tied it all back up again in the last minute, he came back in injury time, and with the last shot of the game, he hit the volley that won them those precious 3 points. Regardless, they didn't mean much since Marseille had won as well, so the next game, he scored another and watched Marseille draw their match, reducing their lead to just goal difference, and guess what? A week later, with Bordeaux tied in the 84th minute, he scored the winner to keep them in a race, and in the following game, with 3 matches remaining, he watched them go behind, played in the most perfectly floated cross for the equalizer, saw them concede again, and then literally played in a corner, watched the mess unfold, ran into the box and scored the equalizer himself, before finally smacking in the volley that allowed his teammate to score the winner on the rebound, so that 2 hours later, later, when Marseille lost to Lyon, Bordeaux jumped up to the top of the table, meaning a couple weeks later, with 12 wins in 12 games with 11 goal contributions from Gourcuff, Bordeaux were French champions against all odds. So, once they handed them the awards for Ligue 1's Goal of the Season, as well as the league's Player of the Season and even the overall award for French Player of the Year, they knew no piece of metal was enough to truly honor him. They had to bring Zidane himself to pass him the torch. You see, people like to say that Gourcuff would have succeeded if he had Zidane's mentality, but that makes no sense. Zidane was probably even more shy than Gourcuff. This is a guy who literally drove back to his mom's house after winning the Euros instead of celebrating with his teammates. A guy who was only able to break through at Bordeaux at the age of 24, even older than Gourcuff. In fact, you know what one of Zidane's coaches said about him at the time? When he arrived, we saw an introvert, a kid who doubted himself, but with every single one of us around him, his confidence grew every day. We gave him the self-belief he needed to reach his potential. And as per usual, that quote is eerily similar to what Gourcuff's own assistant manager had to say. Gourcuff is timid, but he does have character. However, if he feels like he doesn't have people's confidence and he's all by himself, he doesn't produce anything. He needs his confidence to come from those around him. The difference is that with Gourcuff, everyone outside of Bordeaux seemed desperate to take him down. You know, it was already bad enough that seemingly out of pure pettiness, Ancelotti had spent all season downplaying his performances, claiming that what value does his talent have if he remains weak psychologically? But the worst was that once he got sacked and the board came in, actually trying to get Gourcuff back from his loan, clearly accepting they had made a mistake, well, they didn't take too kindly to the fact that he did not want to go back. So, first of all, they delayed negotiations until deadline day to make sure he could not take a move out to Arsenal, since Arsene Wenger was back on the prowl. And once they were forced to accept that €15 million buyout clause, now clearly far below his real market value, they resorted to even dirtier tactics. Gourcuff's second season started off great. He took a second Super Cup title as the man of the match, then he got 6 goal contributions in the opening 3 league games, before moving his focus to the Champions League where, despite being drawn into the group of death, alongside Juve and Bayern, he scored at Allianz Arena to lead Bordeaux to a first place finish undefeated and with the highest points tally across any team in the tournament. By January, Bordeaux were still alive in all competitions, sitting once again at the top of the table with an 8-point lead, while Gourcuff was getting nominated to the Ballon d'Or and making the cover of Pro Evolution Soccer. But Milan wasn't done with him. For God knows what reason, around that time, Maldini started publicly blaming Gourcuff for his failure at Milan, saying he had refused to learn Italian, that he was always late to training, that he was antisocial, which, to be fair, up till then, just sounds like perfectly normal behavior for a kid who had just gone through some of the most traumatic events you could possibly imagine. But not only did most of that turn out to be lies, but the strangest part was when he was also accused of drinking too much. As his father said in his defense, for Maldini to speak like this, there must be some kind of conspiracy. They're bad-mouthing my son when they have Ronaldinho there, who makes Ribery's parties look like a kid's thing. If, already at that point, Gourcuff was being forced to deal with the kind of pressure Zidane had never faced, with the French tabloids determined to turn him into the French David Beckham, once this Maldini drama hit the stands, it became too much. As his teammate Mathieu Chalmé explained, Gourcuff hated to be the center of attention, but in a second, he went from a discreet life to one where everyone wanted Yoann Gourcuff for an interview. They wanted to meet him, to see him on TV. People stared at him in the street. Over his next 11 league appearances, Gourcuff only won 2 games, scoring a single goal and making 1 assist before going out injured for the final 5 matches of the season. Bordeaux did not just miss out on the title, they fell down to 6th and didn't even qualify for the European competitions. All while, in the meantime, they also lost the final of the Coupe de France, and despite Gourcuff still pulling through with 3 goal contributions in 4 knockout games, in what was still their best Champions League performance in 25 years, they got knocked out in the quarters by country rivals Lyon. It was humiliating. And of course, to make matters worse, as Gourcuff went into the 2010 World Cup, his first international tournament, not only was the national team surrounded by unprecedented chaos, as Benzema and Ribery were accused of acquiring the services of an underage escort, but with Ribery seeing his stock fall down even further, with fans actively protesting his call-up, while the newspapers basically rested the country's hopes on Gourcuff. Well, in a fit of jealousy, seeing as the tabloids had been questioning Gourcuff's sexuality after his repeated denials of whichever new girlfriend they had made up for him that week, Ribery began turning his inner circle against him, claiming he was just some pretty rich white boy getting everything handed to him, and suddenly, the bullying started. They made fun of him for reading on the team bus, they chanted homophobic songs they made up about him, they outright slapped him at one point, causing an actual fight to break out, and in the opening game, they refused to pass the ball to him, forcing the manager to sub him off, ignoring calls for Anelka and Ribery to be dropped, and instead choosing to drop Gourcuff. Only to, ironically, watch those two lead a mutiny against him, getting the whole squad to go on strike in what was simply the most humiliating moment in the history of French football. Things got so bad, he actually had manager Domenech on a talk show trying to explain it all mid-World Cup, while they brought in Ribery as a surprise guest, only for him to go on a rant about how I don't have a problem with Gourcuff, I just don't like how he made me out to be the bad guy. Sure, as Vicente Lizarazu, a World Cup winner and another of Zidane's closest friends would say, Gourcuff reminds me of the kid in school who is a little too good of a student and therefore gets made fun of. I think he should be protected just as Zidane was. I must remind you, when I met Zidane, he was just as shy as Gourcuff. Nevertheless, on the final group stage game, Gourcuff was put back on the lineup. And if there were any doubts that the pressure had been put under was too much, they died that day. 26 minutes in, Gourcuff was sent off with a red card. Though in a completely different manner, just like it had happened with Zidane, a red card in his last ever World Cup match put an end to his career. It was almost poetic. With the newspapers describing his performance as spineless and whimpering, a rampant move to Lyon seemed to make a lot of sense, since he could find shelter in the company of his friends Loris and Toulala, while the club simply followed the motto that, if you can't beat them, sign them. But their second most expensive signing ever and highest paid player in the league just didn't work out. Over the next 5 years, he'd miss 114 matches through injury, as his father accused Lyon of having forced him into surgery against doctors' orders shortly after his signing, ruining his knees, and while the club insisted his real problems were mental, that they had to hold a gun against his head to even get him on the pitch, at times seemingly accusing him of being a hypochondriac who never believed himself to be 100% fit, so much so that once he walked off the pitch against his manager's orders, insisting he had a knock, the manager literally told the press, "At this point, I literally hope that he is injured." So, a few months later, they just let him move back to Rennes on a free transfer, and unfortunately there, the story was the same. 461 days on the sidelines in 3 years, and so, after a failed 5-month-long move to Dijon, he quit football at just 32 years old, completely left the spotlight and moved to a coastal town, where he now plays in tennis tournaments as a hobby.